very warm welcome back to the Global Sports Channel Motorsports Show to Christopher Foster. Christopher, how are you this week?
Yeah, very good, thanks, mate. Good to be here.
It's been lots happened since we last spoke. We've had the funeral for Prince Philip, and Nikki Daly is trying to get to the Tokyo Olympic Games, our team member who's not with us this week.
She is, yeah, she's doing her best. I think they got some games this week. And, watching Prince Philip's funeral, I think we do that sort of thing very well in England, don't we? I think with this sort of pomp and ceremony. But, what sort of stood out for me was, I don't know if you saw it, but they carried his coffin in on a Defender that he designed. But I just felt for the guy that had to drive it that slow, like if you've ever driven a Defender and you feel the clutch weight on it. Like, I don't know if it was an automatic or not, but the only thing I can think was, God, he's going to kill him by the time he's finished with this.
I wonder if all those sorts of things are taken into consideration.
I'm certain they're not. somebody got in and started driving it and then realised the challenge that they had on their hands, I think.
Well, we're going to hold the fort down this week while Nikki's not with us, and we're going to have a good chat about the Imola Grand Prix that happened in the weekend, and boy, oh boy, was there lots to talk about from this race. It was pretty exciting stuff. But before we actually get into it, what were your expectations heading into the weekend? I know we said on the last week's show you had your predictions, but did you have a bit of a think about it before the weekend, and was there anybody that was sticking in your mind that you thought might do well this weekend?
Yeah, well, I didn't see Leclerc finishing fourth. I didn't sort of predict that. It was very good. I mean, I think, they were kind of relatively quick all weekend, weren't they? It's not like it was a freak weather result. So, with Sainz finishing fifth as well, it's a good result for Ferrari. So that's, it's fantastic because we might, if they can start to contend, we might really see a three-way fight or, a 2.5-way fight, which would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Obviously, when you saw the weather forecast and realised that it was likely to be changeable, that mixed things up a bit. But no, I think you always look at Mercedes and Red Bull at the moment, and it's theirs to lose, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I must say I was excited on Friday when I saw the weather forecast, and they were predicting quite a bit more rain than actually occurred. But we'll get into that when we talk about the race and what happened. So let's have a look at qualifying, because qualifying was really, really interesting, and there was a couple of standout performances. So I'll just throw up the qualifying results for the top 10. And This is effectively what made up the grid at Imola in the weekend. So let's start off at the bottom of the grid there, number 10, Lance Stroll. Were you surprised to see Stroll in the top 10?
I think he's done well. I say all year, both races, hasn't he? Really, he's shown Vettel a clean pair of heels, and ultimately he's getting it done. So, we'll see. Aston are trying to appeal the regulation change a little bit, aren't they? So let's see what happens with that down the road. But I think he's sort of maximising what he's got there with the Aston. I genuinely think he's doing a good job.
Yeah, let's talk about that Aston Martin. Let's say, Horner has actually said from Red Bull that it was a bit of a naive question that they've put forward to the FIA about this whole situation. But do we think it's a bit of Mercedes giving? We know that Toto Wolff and Lance Stroll's fathers are good friends, aren't they? So do you think Mercedes are stirring the pot a little bit here to try and get their high rake situation sorted out? Sorry, low rake situation.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine so, and I don't think it's necessarily to do with them being friends, but they're both running the same concept, aren't they? So, if it benefits Aston, it benefits Mercedes. I don't know, at this stage, what do you lose by trying to push it? If you're Aston and you're Mercedes, what do you lose? And I think, from Christian Horner's perspective, I'm 100% sure if it was the other way around, he'd be doing the same. Red Bull always as an organisation have been the first to push and push and push and use everything they can to get an advantage or to regain ground. So, yeah, I think it's the right thing to do. What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah,
and he might say it's naive, but it's not, is it? It's just trying to maximise what you've got.
Yeah, for those people that are tuning into the show and you're not too familiar with the regulation changes that have come out in 2021, we have a situation where, basically the governing bodies were trying to slow the cars down, and they took away, I think, around about 10% of the downforce. Well, that was the target anyway. And as a result of that, we've seen two distinct styles of floor design here from the cars this year. We've seen what we call a low rake, which is just the Mercedes and the Aston Martin team, and all the other teams are running what we call a high rake setup. And basically what happens is the car with a high rake setup is actually on a angle, I guess you could say, Christopher, a deeper angle between the front wheels and the back wheels, which gives them a distinct advantage. Well, it seems to be that way so far this year, although Mercedes are winning races and they've still got the low rake situation, haven't they? So it could be argued that way. So we've got Aston Martin who are trying to look at the rules in a philosophical way, and to see whether they can get any advantage to try and change their dilemma, because it certainly seems to be impacting them, and there's no doubt about that they've gone backwards from last year. But I agree with you. I think Lance Stroll's done a good job to get on in the top 10 in qualifying, and of course he put Sebastian Vettel to the sword again. And we're going to talk about Mr. Vettel as we get into the race recap. Esteban Ocon came in at 9th in the Alpine. What did you think of that performance from a qualifying point of view?
Yeah, again, he's showing Alonso clean pair of heels, isn't he? I think Ocon's a good driver. I'd be interested to see, where his career goes. Obviously he is a Renault driver at the moment. He's been on the Mercedes program. We'll come on to Russell, I'm sure, later. But it would be interesting to see, to follow their fortunes, Ocon's and Russell's this year, and as and when there is a seat at Mercedes seat, who's in the pole position for that. But I think in qualifying, he did a good job. I think he put a weekend together quite nicely. Obviously finished ahead of Alonso in the race as well. So I think he's, again, a couple of years now with the team, and I think he's getting the job done.
Yeah, exactly right. Position 8 in qualifying went to Valtteri Bottas. Now, here's a surprise. Mercedes down in 8th position, and I guess it was the start of what turned out to be a pretty horrid weekend for Bottas, yeah?
Yeah, it was, yeah. I mean, he just didn't improve, did he? I was looking before the show at the times, and he basically did the same time in Q1, Q2, and Q3. Whereas obviously Hamilton, in fact, Bottas was quicker than Hamilton in Q1, and then they're about the same in Q2, and then Bottas kind of didn't really improve then in Q3, which left him where he was, and I think that's kind of the pace he had. And if you look at the race, we'll come on to Russell later, but the reality is that Williams was racing in Mercedes, and perhaps the Mercedes shouldn't really be in that position. So a tough weekend for Bottas. I'm sure the pressure is cranking up on him there, as it always is. But yeah, he just didn't get the job done in Q3.
It's interesting you say that. We're only 2 races into the season, and already we're talking about pressure being put on drivers and speculation and all the rest of it starting so soon in the season. Position 7 now, Lando Norris. He was almost in tears after qualifying because he thought he had pulled off something pretty special, hadn't he? But those track limits that we talked about in the last race, they came to bear on Lando Norris again this time, didn't they?
Yeah, unfortunately, and he did such a good job. Again, quick throughout the weekend, showed it on the Sunday as well. But ultimately, track limits, aren't they? I mean, I'm not sure they were necessarily enforced for everyone else properly, but he clearly was in breach of track limits, and we've seen it before that if you're in breach of track limits, your time is discounted. So it's unfortunate, and it was a sort of fairly spectacular finish to the qualifying, but it is what it is, I think, and I don't think there's any arguments there.
P6, Daniel Ricciardo, Lando's teammate, of course, and seems to be struggling a little bit in getting grips with the McLaren. He's openly admitting that as well, that he's still not 100% comfortable. And after Lando's almost amazingly fast lap, he ended up ahead of Lando again, but he's still steady, isn't he, in P6 and doing a good job in McLaren for only 2 races in?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you look at it, if you take Norris's time that was deleted, he was quite a bit quicker than Ricciardo. I think you would possibly, if you were Ricciardo, you'd probably think you should perhaps be ahead of Leclerc and Gasly. But I think it will take him, as we mentioned last week, it will take him a little bit of time to get to grips with the car and the power unit and see where he is. But I think he's doing okay. But I think, if it continues like this, his stock versus Norris is going to struggle a little bit.
Yeah. P5, you talked of Gasly, and seems as though they got a fantastic car for Saturdays. The AlphaTauri, it seems to be super performing on a Saturday.
Yeah, when you don't crash it, yeah. I mean, Tsunoda struggled, didn't he? But I think, it's an easy mistake to make. But I think Gasly, I mean, again, with Gasly, where does he go? What's his career trajectory? Because he's, you would struggle to argue that he doesn't deserve a Red Bull seat right at the moment, but it doesn't. None of the noises or sort of information that we're hearing out of Red Bull suggests that he's on his way back there or close to being on his way back there. So, it's interesting things to see how it develops. Where's he going? What's he going to do? He's obviously, an incredible talent. The environment at AlphaTauri seems to fit him much better than Red Bull. I don't think he's alone in that, but it'd be fascinating to see as a driver where he goes. Does he leave the Red Bull program? Will they try and retain him with AlphaTauri and try and develop that relationship? We saw with Ricciardo, with Sainz, didn't we? That drivers can leave the Red Bull program and flourish, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Gasly do that as well.
Yeah, I'm starting to think a different strategy for this. I would have agreed with you last year maybe, but what I'm seeing is, and he's using this to his advantage because he knows he's the king boy at AlphaTauri now. He's had a Grand Prix win with them. There's a lot of drivers on the grid that haven't won a Grand Prix in their career, right? And even though you're with a so-called B team, he's been able to achieve that goal in his career. And who's to say that he can't be on the podium again this year? So I think if he digs his heels in and they produce a good car with the new regulations coming in 2022, why not stay there? Why not build? Get that team built around you and get all that support and see what happens. So I guess the Honda question is going to be the big one for him, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think Honda, but I think also, what Red Bull want to do with AlphaTauri. What is the purpose of it? So previously they've always been, they've always been fairly clear that the purpose of Toro Rosso was to develop drivers for Red Bull. I think that's changed a little bit recently, but I wonder if they'll want to keep him and keep him as a yardstick for young drivers, as they kind of have done with Kvyat in the past, or whether they'll say, well, look, the purpose is to develop drivers for Red Bull. Gasly's not going back in a Red Bull. We'd rather have the seat for another young driver that we're bringing through. It's an interesting one. It's, AlphaTauri is the only team really in that position, so it's a fascinating one to see how it develops. But he's certainly doing the job, isn't he?
Yeah, and maybe Red Bull turn around and say, "Hang on a minute, we've got a B team here that's like a 1A team, right? If we can win races with this team and get podiums, why not let them go, right, and see what they can do?"
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a big question mark over, where AlphaTauri will be next year with a regulation change. It's always a much bigger job it's the same job, but you've got less resources in a smaller team, obviously. So I wouldn't necessarily expect them to be in the same position next year as they are this year, because I think the regulation change will be a challenge. So let's wait and see. I think next year we'll see the big teams again at the front, and then we'll see the smaller teams sort of clawing their way up as they have the time to develop a bit slower.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to P4 in qualifying, and Scuderia Ferrari got up there, and Charles Leclerc, you were quite impressed with this move. You were telling me off air before we started the show today that you were a bit surprised to see Charles up there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was watching practice on Friday, and he had an off there, as a few drivers did, and, it's a high pressure environment to drive a Ferrari in Italy. And yeah, I think he did very well. I'm hoping that the car is now, it's going to be shows that this car is, it's the start of a bit of a rejuvenation for Ferrari, and hopefully we can have a sort of, Mercedes, Red Bull, and sometimes Ferrari and sometimes McLaren championship. I think that would be fantastic. I think Leclerc again showed, what a good driver he is, how he can get the best out of the car when it really matters. And particularly, you compare him in qualifying against Sainz. I think you saw that. So yeah, I was surprised, but very, very pleasantly surprised. And hopefully, it eases a bit of the pressure at everyone over in Maranello, to get a good qualifying result in Italy.
And you were mentioning Sainz, and it's a bit like Daniel Ricciardo, that these guys are just taking their time to get their feet under in the new team. And if we look back at what Ricciardo did at Renault, he took 4 or 5 races to really get it going, and then he seemed to really step up a gear after 4 or 5 races. And I have no doubt it's going to happen at McLaren as well. What I like about the Ferrari is that it's it's not just a Saturday or Sunday car now. They seem to have the qualifying dialed in. They also seem to have really good, strong race pace. And like many of these races that we've seen so far, it's really, a few things happened here and there, right? Being in the right place at the right time. And it could have been maybe a podium place as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, again, we'll come to race in a minute, but Sainz did a good job on Sunday, and they were there on merit, weren't they? I think, you can be the right place at the right time, but you can also be in the wrong place, and they've been in the wrong place enough. So I think it's good to have them back.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, moving into the top three for qualifying, and surprise, in third spot, Max Verstappen. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just so close, isn't it? It's so close to between him and Perez in the qualifying that it could easily have flipped, and then suddenly we're saying, oh, well, it was Mercedes, and then, Verstappen is best of the rest. So I think Perez is really holding him honest there. And yeah, it's good to see that inter-team battle, really.
Yeah, I'm really liking what we're seeing from Perez, and we'll talk about the race in a minute, but to be dialed in so quickly, to be able to put a car on P2 against this level of drivers all around you, you go right down to Bottas and Ocon and those guys, right? You've got some really serious talent on that grid. And the first thing he said when he got out of the car was, I should have been on pole, right? He realised that he made a mistake on that last corner, and he wanted to be up there. So he's got the hunger, that's for sure. And I really believe, and I was going to bring this up with you today because I think Max Verstappen's a little bit overrated. I've got to say that. And the reason I say that is because of a statement that came out during the week from Daniel Ricciardo, and he was talking about, you put any of us top drivers in the best car, and you're going to see who the real fast drivers are. And he said, Daniel Ricciardo said, Sergio Perez is one of the fastest guys on the grid, and he's only just now been given a chance in a real championship fighting car to show his talent. And I think what he did on Saturday was extraordinary. To be up there in P2 was just an overall great performance. Yeah,
it's a really interesting one because it's all environmental, right? So they're all talented drivers. We come back to quite a few times, but Stroll gets a lot of criticism for basically being Lawrence Stroll's son, effectively. But he's still a brilliant driver, good enough to qualify P10 in a challenging car on one. So he's very, very good. And I think motorsport is circumstantial. So you take a driver out. If you took all of these drivers out and stuck them in Le Mans cars, the top Le Mans drivers, they wouldn't be quicker than the top Le Mans drivers, right? It's all about the environment that you're in. And I think, what is impressive about Verstappen, as we touched on a little bit last week with Verstappen and Hamilton, is he gets it done when he has to get it done. So Perez did very well, obviously, in qualifying, and in the race, he just kind of had issue after issue after issue after issue after issue. And that's what you very rarely see from a Hamilton or a Verstappen, and that's what you need to pull a championship together, right? And I think that's what makes the difference between the good drivers who are able to do it on a lap or do it, one race out of three, and the ones that are every single race being able to deliver.
So let's talk about pole position. Couple of questions, I guess, that we should talk about in relation to the pole position. The first one is, are Mercedes back? Are they back to the top? Have they dialed that car in? And secondly, were you surprised to see Lewis on pole?
I'm not sure Mercedes has ever gone away. I think they've always got a good package. I think Red Bull also have a good package, so it's going to be close. And it's whoever kind of gets the job done on the day. So I think we could have very easily, as you said before, have seen Perez on pole or Verstappen. So I think it's very, very close up there. And was I surprised to see Hamilton on pole? I don't think it's ever really a surprise to see Hamilton on pole, but I probably would have gone with Verstappen if I had to put money on it. Yeah.
What was really interesting was after the qualifying and the talk about the strategy, because very different when you've got a Red Bull lockout in the front row versus having Hamilton up the front. And I guess it was all on for the start of the race, and we saw a brilliant start from Verstappen in terms of the way he got off the line and all of the turmoil that happened before the race as well, because we had rain falling, we had parts of the circuit that were a lot wetter than other parts of the circuit, so the drivers must have had it in their head, to expect the unexpected. And when you're the first car off and you're hitting those corners for the first time in front of everybody else, you don't know whether you're going to be part of a ice skating rink or whether you're going to have all the grip that you think's under your car. So what were you thinking when it came to strategy once Lewis was on pole position? What do you think was going to play out as far as the Red Bulls go?
I mean, strategy is a really interesting one because, now so much of it is computerized, right? So much of it is done through a computer program. And I think, the interesting thing about strategy, and I've been here before, where, you have two cars in a race, they're qualified, you sit for hours and hours in the strategy planning and then they get to the first corner and take each other out, It's like, you're sat here with all these options and there's nothing. And we kind of saw that in Imola. You can sit here and you can plan and plan and plan, and then you get to the first corner, Hamilton tries to stick it on the outside, goes over, he could have damaged his front wing, he could have damaged his floor, all sorts of issues, all sorts of things that could have happened, and then suddenly everything resets, right? And you have to start again, and maybe you have to come into the pits, and maybe then you change your tires. So it's one of those things where you come up with a plan of how you think it will go, and the reality is that there's so many things that can change. You've got to think on your feet, and the teams that work well are the ones that can think on their feet and react to the environment that they're in and the reality of the race. So I don't think it made a huge difference. I suppose you could perhaps argue that, that not having Bottas there made it a bit trickier, but that run into the first corner at Imola is so sort of, there's not really a straight, it's a kink, as we'll see later, it's a kink, and then it's quite hard braking, and it's a very tight corner. So there was always going to be mayhem in that corner, potential for mayhem in that corner.
Now, before we talk about the race itself, let's talk about what happened just before the race and one Sebastian Vettel, whose luck doesn't seem to... He must have driven over a black cat last year sometime, because his luck is just so terrible, isn't it? Here he is sitting on the grid. All the cars are in formation and they can't get his tyres on in time, and he has to start from the pit lane. What a disaster for him. He must have been thinking, oh no, it's all over again, right? So what was your take on the way that Aston Martin are dealing with these issues?
Yeah, I mean, for a driver, it's very tough, isn't it? Because, for a driver like Vettel, where, his confidence is presumably fairly low after the Ferrari years, he's come to Aston as a refresh, had a very tough first race. The next race he was there, ready to kind of go again, and then suddenly something completely out of your control happens, and you just, it's very hard in that scenario not to let your head go, and suddenly you're at the end of the pit lane. And I think it's easy to underestimate the impact of that, of not just starting last, but starting in the pit lane, and you watch and you see all the cars drive past, and you're waiting for this little light here, and it seems to take an age, and then it goes and you're off. And, and particularly a race like that, when it's kind of wet, dry, it's so easy to make a mistake. And we saw, almost everyone making a mistake. You saw Verstappen make a big mistake, and luckily he caught it, but he could easily have not caught it. And it's mentally, that's very, very difficult. And we see the drivers who are really on top form and really, have their head right, like Hamilton, can make a big mistake and then just make this absolutely incredible comeback. And that's what the weather gives you an opportunity to do. But if you're in a position like Vettel, where your confidence is low, it's so easy to go into those 50-50s and get it wrong, and starting at the back, that's very difficult. So I do feel for him. It's just one of those things, again, there's a lot of variables in racing. Everyone's trying to kind of do their best, and these things happen, but you got to feel for the guy.
Yeah, I didn't like his press conference after the race. He was having that very negative black space on his face again, and just saying about we have to improve, and you could already start to see or feel that he's sensing him, that's not going to be his year again, and things are going backwards before they go forwards. But let's talk about the race. It got underway. We had very changing weather conditions. It was pretty exciting from a spectator point of view, because you didn't know what was going to happen. And the question that really started to unfold as the laps ticked away was who was going to come in and try slicks first. That was really the first roll of the dice, wasn't it? So were you surprised that some of the top teams stayed out as long as they did?
No, not really, because when you look at the forecast and you see conditions like that, as a big team, you hate it, because you want consistency, right? You want dry track, because you've got the quickest car, you know what you're doing. you're on it. For the small teams, they'll be looking at that and sort of rubbing their hands going, this is fantastic. We've got an opportunity to throw the dice here and, maybe come up with something. So I think in a circumstance like that, you often see the first driver or first team onto slicks or onto wets or whichever way it's going is somebody who's throwing the dice. And most of the time, actually, I think if you looked at it and plotted it, most of the time it doesn't work out. It's very rare that the first person comes in, puts on slicks and is absolutely, makes a huge gain, or puts on wets, makes a huge gain. So I think the front running teams, while the other front running teams are still on the original tyre, will always be a bit slower to react.
Yeah, we talked about strategy just a few minutes ago and how some of the teams get it right and some get it wrong. I was bewildered by Pierre Gasly staying out so long on the wets. Why didn't they bring him in earlier?
No idea. You'd have to ask them that. I mean, it's it's a tough one, isn't it? Because you kind of, whatever you do, you're wrong. I mean, you've got to get the balance right of the tyres that you have available. You've got to get the balance right in terms of where it's going to bring you in and out in traffic. Most of the time you have a time. So you say, look, when the times get under this point, that's when we can move to slicks, or that's when we can move to inters.
So as you said, there was quite a few drivers making mistakes as the race went on. We had a safety car period, and Sergio Perez made a stupid mistake. I would have said a mistake for a beginner driver, a rookie, but you do not pass other cars, right, under the safety car. What was he thinking? Yeah. Or why did he make that mistake, do you think?
I think it's just pressure, isn't it? It's just, he went off, came straight back on, and was just obviously kicking himself for having gone off, and then you just do it. And it's what we all do. We all do things in the not the moment. You're like, why have I done that? But it's an immediate thing, isn't it? And unfortunately, when you look at it in a cold light of day, it was clearly the wrong thing to do. But I think he was probably kicking himself for going off, tried to make it better, and then realised.
Now, if you look back on the history on Formula One races, if you watch every Grand Prix that's ever taken place, there's usually a particular lap that has a significant impact on the whole race. And we had that at Imola. Lap 32 was the lap where everything got blown up, literally. And we first of all saw a horrendous, and I've got to say it was horrendous because it could have been a tragic accident. Actually, it was, those cars were going incredibly fast, and we're talking about George Russell in the Williams and Valtteri Bottas in the Mercedes came together. At the time, there was a very heated outcome from the crash where George Russell thought he was in the right and went over to tell Bottas exactly how he felt about the situation, and in response, Bottas gave him the single digit and told him to get on with it, I guess. What did you first of all see about that accident? And what was your initial reaction, Christopher, when you first saw it? Did you think anyone in particular was in blame?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, it was kind of everything it was all the drama of sport, wasn't it? Fortunately, no one was hurt. I think, looking at it, the Haley did a good job again. If you look at the angle and the direction that Russell went into Bottas, I think that helps enormously. So that's a good thing of it. I think for my money, it was Russell. If you watch the coming into the first corner at Imola, it's, as we said before, it's not really a straight; it's kind of a kink. And obviously Bottas, he's not. If someone's coming up behind you, you're not obligated to just stay as far left as you can and give them as much room as they possibly want. But Russell still had to find his way past, and we saw before, later on in the race, with Norris and Hamilton, how you do that successfully. So Bottas was in the same situation there, and he was effectively just following the dry line. He left more than enough space for Russell, but Russell just misjudged it slightly. Got one reel on the grass, the wet grass, and went in. But again, it's why it's fantastic that we have these sort of traditional circuits where you've got grass either side. If that was at Bahrain couple of weeks before, it's not an issue, is it? You just keep going wider and wider. So I think, to answer your original question, for me it was Russell's incident. He was the one making the move, so it's his responsibility. I don't believe Bottas squeezed him at all. I think Russell kind of lost it on his own, which is very, very easy to do in those conditions, but Russell lost it on his own and into Bottas.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that Russell was to blame, and for a whole host of different reasons. I think in terms of, this rubbish about Bottas, taking another line and trying to push him off the track is rubbish. He was, as you said, I think, taking the dry line and doing what any driver would have done in that situation. Take that piece of the track that you deservedly have because you're in the front, and then making the driver behind you work for the overtaking manoeuvre. And if he's good enough, he pulls it off. If he's not, or he makes a mistake, then he ends up in the wall, and that's what happened, unfortunately, to both of them. Do you think with Russell there was anything in his mind about, this is the Mercedes, it's a chance for me to overtake him? Was that an extra inspiration for him, do you think?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure it was. And it is with everyone. With every driver, every athlete. There is always that human side, isn't there? And I imagine, he felt, here I am in a Williams, overtaking Mercedes. This is my opportunity to kind of make a statement. Good for him. Absolutely the right way to think. And if he got it done, then we'd all be hailing him as a hero, and we'd be saying was this the turning point where Russell kind of metaphorically and physically overtook Bottas in Mercedes? But I think, in reality, Bottas was never going to move off the line. You got to think of it from his perspective. It was very wet offline, and he had to, the place where that has the biggest impact is under braking, right? So he wasn't going to move offline because then he wouldn't have been able to brake in the best place. So he was always going to carry that line. It's not just about being on the straight; it's where you position your car for braking. So I think there was a lot of that probably in it. I think there was a lot of that afterwards as well. And I think, that's the point where Russell looked down and go, okay, well, look, I made a mistake in the crash. That happens. I made a bigger mistake probably in the way that I reacted to it, and now I look a bit silly. And there's a bit of work to do to repair that, really.
Yeah, philosophically, it would have been interesting to see if he had overtaken Bottas. I would have liked to hear what Toto Wolff's responses would have been at the end of the race. If he held on to that position, it would have been a considerably different than it was, putting George Russell in his place after the race.
Yeah, and then that's another storyline, isn't it? If he'd have actually got past Bottas, then put yourself in Bottas's head, and you've suddenly had the guy that might potentially be replacing you, overtaking you in a car that's clearly inferior, and the stress around that, and I've got to get past that, and in those difficult conditions, it could have been. There's so many different ways that little dynamic could have gone. So it's a shame it ended. Obviously.
Yeah, actually, in hindsight, looking at it now and listening to what you're saying, it could actually be a career-changing situation, right? It could have very easily been a career-changing situation, because Toto's come out now categorically and put George Russell in his place and threatened to put him down into the Clio class, which is the pits, right? So I guess in terms of there could have been a different outcome. Let's move on though. We've got Lewis Hamilton spinning off on the same lap and going into the gravel trap. First of all, did you think that was game over for him, or did you think he was going to be able to get his car started? Because I was quite impressed with the way that he calmly reversed back out of the gravel trap and got back onto the track again.
Yeah, it's hugely impressive, isn't it? It's not just outright speed that does it. And I did think it was probably game over, because getting the cars into reverse, is tough. And then again, old school circuit, so he's got to reverse across the gravel, which is hard in and of itself. And then he's got to get back onto the track, and he's so far behind. Okay, he was helped with all the other issues, but later in the race. But I just think that presence of mind and that coolness of mind when he is in the barrier, not to do what Perez did, and not to do what Russell did, which is immediately react. And I'm sure you see as much with all the other athletes that you talk to, is thinking calmly under pressure. Okay, I'm in this situation now. What is the best case scenario from this point? And I think to calmly be able to engage gear, and even watching it from the outside, it took him an age, to get it into reverse, which must have felt horrendous inside the helmet. So, but all these things matter. And if you it's the difference between a good driver and a great driver, I think, and it's not just in in talent or anything, but if you do a track walk with a good driver, they'll be there, and they're not just going, right, well, here's the curb, that's changed a bit from last year, here's the turning point, here's the surface. What they're doing is looking at the gravel traps, seeing where there's deep gravel, seeing where there's slightly less gravel, thinking, right, if I go off there, how do I get back on? What's the quickest way I can sort of recover from these scenarios? So it's all in the preparation and it's all in the thoroughness of that. And I'm sure that Hamilton is one of those drivers who would do that, and it paid dividends, didn't it, at the weekend?
Yeah, it was phenomenal. And you're right, I think if you look across a lot of sports, those ones that are at the top of their game are able to be in that zone in a way that, first of all, they shut all the white noise out, don't they? They're able to be remaining in that calm space where they can make logical decisions at a very rapid lightning speed and get themselves back on track when they're faced with some adversity. I remember listening to a podcast recently with Usain Bolt, and he was talking about in one of his races, his shoe came undone. And when you're running at 38 kilometers an hour, just for 10 seconds or less, obviously, and your shoe comes undone, it's the most distracting thing that you could ever possibly wish, right? So the way that he dealt with it was he actually put himself in his mind saying that he was going to actually put less pressure on that particular foot so that it didn't explode the shoe, because the shoe could have quite easily just exploded on him. And amazingly, he still ran 9.85 for that race with a broken shoe. Yeah, so again, it's that at that level, isn't it?
Yeah, and it goes either way, right? So you either do that, or you do what Hamilton did, where you make a mistake and you still come back and finish second, or you do what Perez did, and we see this so often in sport where you compound problems. So you have one issue, and then you have another issue because of that issue, and then you lose it, and you have another one, and that's kind of the spiral that Vettel's in at the moment a little bit. And we all have this. You have it in your personal life or whatever. You get angry or frustrated about something, and as soon as that happens, you make mistake after mistake after mistake, and you can kind of draw it all back to that. So what a good athlete or a good driver does is they make that mistake, and then they're able to stay calm and not compound it.
And unlike our friend Sebastian Vettel, it seems as though Lewis Hamilton's got the little lucky streak on his shoulder, because straight away he was able to go into the pits under a safety car and get his car sorted out and come back in and really start to fly after that. So bit of good fortune on his behalf in terms of going off when he did, because he was able to take advantage of that. And who knows what the outcome would have been if he hadn't got that, of course. He would have been chasing from a long way out. So he comes in, he pits, and then the chase is right on, and he starts weaving his way through the field. Did you think for any moment that he was going to catch up to Max?
No, probably not. No, I think he did an incredible job, and I think he was helped by some of the sort of environmental factors, I think, within that. So he, as you say, he was fortunate. But when he was sat in that wall trying to engage reverse, you didn't see him finishing second, did you?
No. Do you think he enjoys racing when there's a challenge like that in front of him, rather than being out in front for 60 laps, going around by himself, counting off the laps? Do you think he seems to enjoy the fact that he's got a battle on his hands this year with Max Verstappen and the Red Bull team? Is that a fair comment, do you think? Yeah,
probably. I mean, I think that all drivers, I think it depends where your motivation comes from. It's an interesting one, isn't it? If you were Vettel now, you'd probably give anything to go back to the Red Bull days where you were on pole and winning, and there were races where you led every lap, and it's incredible. But at the moment, but then it's someone like Hamilton, you've won all these world championships, 7 world championships, and you're the fastest car. You don't have anything to prove, so you don't have, your motivation doesn't necessarily come from the fear of failure, right? It comes from the enjoyment of proving yourself and proving yourself to yourself. And I think he'd have proved a lot more in that race than he would just going out in front with somebody behind, having a mechanical or whatever, and winning by 30 seconds. So
yeah.
I think when you're in a position where you're on top of your game, it's an enjoyable place to be. But at the same time, it can be very challenging if you don't have that confidence.
Okay, well, let's have a look now at the race results for the top 10, and we can talk through these. Let's start off with 10th position and our friend Fernando Alonso. I think Nikki had Fernando on the podium, didn't she, for her choice this week?
Yes, I think that's why she's not here this week. Yeah.
But he's struggling, isn't he? And he's openly admitting this as well in his interviews, that he is not up to it at the moment. And quite a confession for someone like Alonso, because he's never too shy to tell anybody how good he is. But he seems to be coming to some hard realities that he hasn't quite got it with this Alpine at the moment. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he struggled in qualifying, didn't he? And Ocon is doing pretty well. I don't know. It's tough to know, isn't it, how good the car is? But this is the first time in a while that Alonso's had a teammate that's shown him up, and Ocon is doing that consistently. I think, I was actually thinking about it over the weekend because it's not really like Schumacher when he came back and he'd been away from racing for so long. Alonso has been racing consistently, and he's been racing in P1, and which is not necessarily comparable, but not a million miles away from F1. So he shouldn't necessarily be rusty. I think I'm really interested to see whether he can get back to where he was before, which was absolutely one of the top, 3 drivers in the world, or whether he's going to struggle with his comeback and Ocon's going to show him a clean pair of heels, and that'll be that, right, basically, for Alonso. It's an interesting thing to see how it will develop.
Yeah, we've got to say, though, that Alpine have got 2 cars in the top 10, and, AlphaTauri weren't able to do that, Aston Martin weren't able to do that, and Alfa Romeo hasn't even got 1 car in the top 10. So even though they're at the bottom end of that midfield, they still seem to be going okay. Like, let's see in the next couple of races, they might be able to progress maybe above Aston Martin. Who knows? If they get top 8, they'd be happy with that, wouldn't they, Alpine at the moment?
I don't know. I mean, it's tough, isn't it? When they came back into F1, they were meant to be challenging for championships this year. If you look at the trajectory and the business plan they set out at the time. And at the moment they're not even challenging for regular podiums. So I don't know what, if anything, with that has changed, with the move to Alpine. But I don't know. It's tough. You would expect, I think, to see them higher up. I would, for all of Lawrence Stroll's money, he is a private individual, and it was Racing Point. For all of Gasly's heroics and what AlphaTauri are doing, it is still Toro Rosso, it is still AlphaTauri, right? So you would expect the factory Renault team or whatever they're branded as to be a bit higher, I think.
Yeah, fair comment. So P9, P10, both the Alpine cars, and then Lance Stroll, a good job to get into 8th position, and I took a closer look at him when the rain was a little bit heavier during the race, and he's really good in the wet, this guy. He knows how to handle a car in the wet conditions, and I think for the sake of a couple of other unfortunate situations, he could have been even higher up, but he did a great job to be P8.
Yeah. Hey, again, he's doing it, isn't he? We saw last year that he can be good in difficult conditions, in wet conditions, in changeable conditions, and he showed again. And it's a good result, I think, for where they are, P8, and it's very easy in conditions like that, in a race like that, to throw it away. And he didn't, so I think he should be fairly pleased with himself after that.
Is he quietening the haters, do you think? Do you think less and less people are starting to, or more people are starting to realise that he is talented?
I don't know how informed a lot of them are, to be honest. I don't know what you're arguing against. I mean, he clearly deserves to be there. But equally, there's probably 50 drivers that deserve to be in F1. And then they can't all be there. So, it's Perez, who everyone loves now. Has had Mexican money for years and years and years and years and years, and that's got him in. So, he's a good driver. I don't think people necessarily are always that nuanced in how they look at it. But I hope so. I think he's shown to anyone who is watching and properly looking at it that he deserves to be in Formula 1.
Yeah, sure. P7, Pierre Gasly in the AlphaTauri. Disappointing a little bit after the qualifying performance?
No, probably not. I think, again, that's a good result. And I think if you said, right, well, we're behind, a Red Bull, a Mercedes, 2 Ferraris, 2 McLarens, maybe they would hope to be ahead of the Ferraris, but I think Ferrari had a very good weekend. And maybe, I think they might struggle to be quicker than McLaren. So I think he kind of maximised what was available to him.
Daniel Ricciardo, P6, 30 seconds behind his teammate across the finish line. Have we said enough about Daniel, or is he just still finding his feet? We're going to give him a bit more time?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
Yeah, I think so. We'll see a few more races.
Now, P5, perhaps the drive of the day. Carlos Sainz Jr., who put the Ferrari up there into P5 after having a dismal qualifying process. I think I said it last week with you and Nicky as well. This guy, I think, is going to be on the podium, if not the top step, before the end of the year. I've got a lot of time for him. I like the way he's handling himself at Ferrari. He's a quiet achiever. He gets on with it. He puts his head down. He works hard. And he's showing the results on race day, yeah? Yeah, it's a great job, and it's a big thing. Like you said in qualifying, it's a big thing to get a result for Ferrari in Italy. And that works both ways. So if you don't get it, you feel the pressure. If you do get it, it's fantastic. It's a real roller coaster over there. So I think it's fantastic for him that he's done that. In reality, he was pretty close to Leclerc at the end of the race. So I think he's a good driver doing a good job. Yeah, good. P4, Charles Leclerc, his teammate at Ferrari, and 25 seconds behind Max Verstappen, the winner of the race. What do you make of Charles's race performance this weekend?
Yeah, again, I think, fairly strong considering the conditions and what could have happened. I think he was probably disappointed not to be able to finish ahead of Norris and get on the podium. And I think, maybe that was a possibility. I think we were watching we'll come on to it next, but we were watching the Norris-Hamilton duel, and, the longer that was going on, you kind of almost think, well, Hamilton's going to get you anyway, but the longer you do this, closer Leclerc gets. So, I worried a little bit that battle would push Norris back into Leclerc. But obviously it didn't quite in the end. But a good result for Ferrari.
Okay, and then we're going to talk about the podium for this weekend's race at Imola, and we had Lando Norris and the McLaren in third position, 23 seconds behind the winner, and as you just said, a good battle, ding-dong battle with Lewis Hamilton. Norris's tyres had gone, do you think? Too much before that battle started?
I think it's just DRS. I hate DRS. It's just a stupid rule. It's just, it robs us of racing, in those conditions, where there was a dry line, a bit of a wet line, and greasy and damp and everything. We could have had an incredible battle between, Britain's current world champion and, potentially the next superstar. And, we were robbed of that by DRS. And it started off with a little bit of interest because you think, right, well, Norris has got to really push on here and try and make sure that he's not within a second of Hamilton. But then as soon as Hamilton was in, I think he went from like a second to 8/10, didn't he? And as soon as that happens, you're like, right, well, unless he makes a big mistake and crashes, it's over, because he's got enough laps. And at some point, he's just going to breeze past him. And I thought Norris did an absolutely incredible job to keep Hamilton behind, for long enough, or for as long as he did. But I think ultimately it was like, it was a fairly depressing sight because we knew that DRS would just let him fly by, at the end of the straight. And yeah, I think his tyres had gone, but, we've seen many, many times over the years of a driver whose tyres are gone and have shown exceptional skill to put the car in the right place and just keep the driver behind him. And now that is gone because it's no longer about keeping the driver behind you. It's about keeping the driver a second behind you, right? And if you don't have the tyres, you simply don't have the pace. Whereas with great racecraft, even if your tyres are gone and somebody doesn't have DRS, you can put your car in the right position. That there's not that many overtaking places at Imola, so you can put your car in the right position to hold him behind. And I think probably without DRS, we would have had a fantastic battle to see that. So
is DRS still going to be in place when the new regulations come in next year?
I don't know. I hope not.
Yeah, because I thought the whole philosophy here was to be able to have closer racing and having an aerodynamic footprint that allows the car following to be closer to the car in front. So if that is the case and they're realising that aerodynamic efficiency, then surely DRS becomes outdated.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's kind of it's almost a drug, isn't it? That they can't quite get themselves to quit. Everyone knows it's bad for the sport and it's bad for them, but they're not quite brave enough to say, right, let's just drop it and have regular racing because they're just terrified it'll get back to being processional. I hope it's dropped next year. I actually don't know. We'll try and look for next time, but it'd be interesting, and I hope so. I hope the regs just allow you to follow close. But we had good overtakes at the weekend, and I think they would have easily happened without DRS.
I might put a lawsuit together and send it to the FIA because it's performance enhancing drugs. It's banned in cycling and athletics and everything else. Why can't it be banned also in Formula One racing.
Yeah, what's it they call it? Technical doping? It's like
mechanical doping, yeah.
Mechanical
exactly
doping,
right.
yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So Lewis came in after a storming drive back after his accident, and as we say, a little bit of lady luck on his side there, but of course you've still got to get to the checkered flag, and you've still got to pass those other cars, which he did, and set the fastest lap time as well on the way, which now propels him up into the first position of the Drivers' Championship. What do you take of Lewis's overall performance in the weekend?
I think it was very impressive, and it was impressive in qualifying. It was, I was surprised, going into the first corner, that he was so aggressive, because again, a little bit going back to the previous race, when you're on the outside, you've got nowhere to go. And if you watch Verstappen, he just squeezed him a little bit here. And like we said at the start, that could have been fine as it was, or he could have lost the front wing, or he could have damaged the floor or whatever. So again, there are a lot of situations in that where you think, well, that could have ended very differently. He could have ended up in the wall. But I think ultimately, if you break it down into the constituent parts, qualifying was good. The race was strong with some challenges. He should have been more patient when he spun off. Oh, didn't spin, but when he went off. But I think once that happened, he did an extremely good job to recover.
Yeah, I agree. And we've got Max Verstappen, and to me, the race was won on the first half of the first lap, basically. Once he had that fantastic start, he got ahead. It was his to lose, basically, wasn't it, from then on?
Yeah, I think so. But again, very easy to lose. And we saw, that he almost did lose it, and he had a big moment that was, 50-50 whether it went round or didn't. So, he did a good job. And I think probably the driver of the day was Hamilton, really.
Yeah. So
just because of the coolness of the recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. So what team do you think would have walked away from Imola the happiest this weekend, right down the grid? Was there a particular team that would have said, look, we did a really good job this weekend, we're happy with what we've got, whether it be points or just our performance overall?
I think McLaren, probably. I think overall, if you look at McLaren, they are a team that are clearly on the up. They've had some very, very dark times, and this will feel good to them, and it feel like a real vindication of everything they've done and the changes they've made. And they won't necessarily expect to be there. They won't expect to be on the podium. So when they get on the podium, it's because they've really maximised their weekend. And I think we've seen, again, they're not quite there to put a full weekend together in full race pace and dry conditions to get up there. But I think we've seen enough examples now of them putting 2 out of 3 parts together to get a really good result. So
okay, yep.
I think McLaren will be pretty happy.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go for Ferrari. I think they would have walked away with 4th and 5th position, feeling pretty good about themselves, particularly after Sainz's qualifying. For them to come back and have such a strong race, again, at home, and unfortunately the Tifosi weren't there to celebrate or to see them performing so well. So I take Ferrari as my team for this week that I think would have walked away the happiest out of the grid.
I think they'll be relieved. They'll walk away the most relieved.
Relieved, yeah. Okay, so we've got 9 days from now. When we're recording this show, we've got 9 days until the next race, which is in Portugal. We were both saying before the show started today that we love this track. It produces good racing. It's a new addition to the recent Formula One circuit. And what are your predictions, Christopher? Who's going to come out on top in Portugal in 9 days' time?
Yes, it's a great track. It's got a lot of elevation change. The track surface can be very bumpy in parts. I think I don't think we're going to see the end of the track limits controversy around it. I think it's a track that invites that. So sure we will see more of that as we go. It's got a swimming pool in the paddock, which is pretty cool and unique as far as I'm aware. So it's a great place to visit. I think, again, you're hard pushed to look beyond Mercedes and Red Bull. I think the interesting bit will be the stories within that. So how does Bottas respond? I think, to be honest with you, I think that Toto Wolff's response to the Russell affair will have given him a lot of confidence. So it'll be interesting to see if that has any impact and bounces back. It'd be interesting to see if Ferrari can can stay up there where they were at Imola. But I think we're probably looking at sort of Mercedes and Red Bull with kind of a mixture of AlphaTauri, McLaren, Ferrari chasing.
Do you think there's a team that's already, we're going to be 3 races into the season, do you think there's a team that's really under pressure, that's underperforming at the moment, that really needs to have a good race in Portugal?
I think Alpine will, they've got to do something at some point. Maybe the management changes and everything will kind of give them a bit of leeway. But I think, they're in that position where, as a team, you're not where you want to be or you need to be. So there's pressure every race to move up, because they're not going to be happy if they're continuing finishing, at 9th and 10th every race. So they're under a lot of pressure, I think, to move up. I think it's going to be another tough one for Haas. I just think it's shown again that car's, a pretty difficult car to manage. So we'll see what happens with them. But I think everyone else is kind of, Alpha, again, it's difficult, and I don't know how much of their resource they're putting into actually trying to recover this year and how much is going into next year. So you can see the teams who are really struggling. But I think Alpine is probably one for me that is uncomfortably not where it should be and needs to move up throughout the year. Yeah, particularly with Alonso, they're pushing them. His patience isn't going to last forever, is it? Yeah,
exactly. So give me your top 3 drivers then for Portugal next weekend. Who's gonna be the 3rd position?
Perez.
Okay. 2nd spot?
Verstappen.
And it's got to be a Lewis Hamilton win, is it?
Yeah, Hamilton win, yeah.
Are you saying that because he won there last year? Is that why you're taking that from?
I only knew he won there last year this morning. So. I was just searching for the show. So yeah, no. I think it's just it's a toying cost, isn't it, between Verstappen and Hamilton, to be honest, at the moment. So
okay, so you think Red Bull's going to fill up the podium with Lewis on the top step?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go for a cocktail of Mercedes, McLaren, and Red Bull. So I think a McLaren's going to get on the podium this time around, and I'd like to think it would be Daniel Ricciardo, but I'm going to actually say that I think it will be Lando Norris performing well again. I think he would have taken a huge amount of confidence out of what happened in Imola, and he's going to ride that wave all he can. I think he's really stepping up to another level this year. We've seen that in his performances. I think he's really hungry, and I think Daniel Ricciardo is actually bringing that hunger to him, because he wants to show that he's the top dog at the team, I think, and he's really, really going for it. So there we go. We'll go for Mercedes, Red Bull, and McLaren for me for next week.
Yep, smart.
Okay, well, Christopher, it's great catching up with you again. Thanks very much for coming on the Global Sports Channel Motorsports Show, and your great insights to what you saw at Imola. It was a great race. It was a great weekend. There was lots of interesting things, and I think we're quite privileged at the moment because we've got such a lot of great drivers in Formula One at the moment, and we've got teams probably being closer than they have been for a long, long time. So it is exciting. If you're out there watching and listening to the show, tune in to the Formula One World Championships this year, and you're going to see some damn good racing, Christopher, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a fantastic year so far. I think it will continue to us.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again for your time. We'll see you again on the next show, and hopefully Nikki's going to be back with us, giving us an insight from the ladies' world of motorsport as well.
Fantastic. Cheers, Mark.
See you, Christopher.
Thanks. Bye.
There we go, folks. That was Christopher Foster joining me today on the Global Sports Channel Motorsports Show, and we reviewed the Imola Formula One Grand Prix, a fantastic race from the weekend. We're heading into Portugal for the next race on April the 30th, so come along with us. And why don't you drop a note in the comments today and tell us exactly who you think is going to be winning in Portugal for this year's race. If you haven't already subscribed to our channel at the Global Sports Channel, please do so. And hit the little like button as well and the bell notification, and you'll be notified every time we drop a video. We've got lots of amazing sports stars being interviewed on the show in addition to our motorsports show. So make sure you keep up to date with all of that. Don't forget to join us also on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram under the Global Sports Channel. We'd love to see you dropping a comment or two on any of those platforms. Well, time's up for me. The checkered flag has come down. time to leave, and I wish you all a very happy and safe week ahead, and we'll be back again really soon with the next episode from the Global Sports Channel Motorsports Show.